All right. Welcome to our conversation today, our Canna Curious conversation with Danielle, who is the author of Weed Mom. So you guys know this is totally up my alley to be engaging this conversation that is maybe a little taboo and a little stigmatized. But if we peel that back and we actually dive into the truths and the history and the proper usage of something like cannabis, it really can be helpful. I think it's a shame when we stray away from things that can be really helpful for us because of social stigmas. So I'm really happy to have this time with you today, Danielle, and to share the recording with our audience in order to, work on that destigmatizing and empowering moms. Clearly my 4-year-old agrees. So Danielle, if you don't mind introducing yourself and kind of how you got to this space.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to talk today. I'm a journalist and a writer, and I was writing for a few years about cannabis on one side of things and parenting on the other side of things, two topics that I thought, were really very separate from one another. And then once in a while, I would be asked to write something about like how to talk to your kids about cannabis or considerations as a parent who uses cannabis. And so it started getting me thinking, and I was on my own initial journey with cannabis at that moment
Yeah.
too, and kind of negotiating, how I could be a good parent, a responsible parent, and enjoy and benefit from this plant in many wellness areas. So that's really that's how the book came about. Let's see, brief history of my experience with cannabis is that I used to really be a skeptic. I used to not understand it. Even though I grew up in Hawaii, where there's a pretty robust cannabis culture, I would say, it was just not my thing for a long time. And then when I met my husband and we got married, I accepted his cannabis use as just sort of part of who he was, even though I didn't like that particular aspect. Again, it was because of lack of understanding and the stigmas of prohibition, and also the fact that he was overusing. He was kind of leaning on it a little too much in these self-care situations that I think now are really vital and helpful. However, he without any idea of CBD or THC ratios, all the different complexities that cannabis has. So, I went from really disliking it, being fairly judgy about it. And I tell the story in the book, and it's true. It's really crazy that I wrote a book about cannabis, but my husband went to rehab for cannabis. And I know you know that story, and Chelsea, I wrote it in the book, and he's okay with me talking about it. The truth is that just like anything that's helpful and healing, you can overuse it or you can use it mindfully and intentionally. So my personal journey was really learning about it from like more of a writer's perspective first, and understanding the science and really digging into, how it affects people and how the endocannabinoid system works.
Yeah.
And then I started experimenting myself and realizing, because I was a yoga teacher for a long time, realizing, wow, a small dose of cannabis engages me so well on my yoga mat and I'm in my body and I'm present and I'm feeling it and I'm breathing deeply and enjoying myself. And I'm a better parent too when I feel okay, when I feel good. So, all different pieces of my journey. And I do tell the story in the book too.
Yes, and it's so captivating to dig in and read, and I felt so connected to you sharing that part of your story. My husband has used since before we were married, and I've never seen him high. I've never seen him on an over usage, but I felt so much stigma around the concept around, any of my friends or my family knowing that he would even touch it. And he introduced it to me actually because I always had really bad menstrual cramps and just a lot of difficulties with my cycle. And so I was on prescription pain meds for them for years, and he introduced cannabis to me as an alternative to that, which opened my mind a little bit. But then once we had kids, I reverted to this fear fear of irresponsibility, fear of stigmas, fear of how this would interplay. And so we have a lot of interesting conversations about the evolution of that understanding, and how now we both are, intentional, mindful users, and we use cannabis as alternatives to other things that could be part of our story and our stress relief, but we use that a lot in parenting. So it's always interesting to see how these different stages change and evolve. And I don't know about you, I'm sure you've had this experience, but it's really funny for me to talk about it a little bit more and hear people come out of the cannabis closet like, oh my gosh, I haven't been able to talk to anyone else about this. And so that's been really fun to experience too.
For sure. Oh my gosh. To research the book, I interviewed tons and tons of moms, most of whom already use cannabis, but were really on a huge spectrum, on a huge spectrum in terms of how they, how out they were about it and how comfortable they were talking about it, and really how conflicted they were in their own minds, because we're dealing with our own stigmas and our own, stumbling blocks from prohibition, from lack of education.
Yeah. Well, that leads us right into this question that we got, which is, what does responsible use with cannabis mean? And how do we, or can we, be a good parent and a cannabis user?
So I say 100% yes, we can. We can be good parents and responsible cannabis users. And it really comes down to, knowing the correct product and dose and method of consumption for you. And of course, finding the right CBD to THC ratios, finding the right terpenes. It's a complex matrix. Cannabis is not just one, one size fits all. So if we take a little time, be patient, titrate our experience, I think it's absolutely possible to be a responsible cannabis user as a parent, because, you have everything from microdoses, just the smallest amount of THC that can, help us shift in a very small way, like help shift our attitudes. 1 or 2 degrees is what I talk about. It's not about, changing our personalities or becoming a, super mom or a couch locked mom or any of that, but, just kind of tuning in to what we need so we can better take care of ourselves and care for the people around us. That's really what cannabis helps me do.
Yeah. And I'm wondering if we could go into that just a little bit more, because I think it's intimidating. It's intimidating to know that you have to play with different types or strains or terpenes and balance, like you said, of the CBD and the THC, and find what works for you. And I know that can be intimidating to people, especially moms who feel like we don't have a lot of time to spare. We don't have a lot of time to test. But it makes me think back to, similarly, that's what my journey was with SSRIs, or antidepressants. You had to figure out how your body responds and what it does respond to. What would you say to someone who is, thinking about trying some things, but it's intimidating to be on that journey? I know you go into this in the book and have a lot of helpful charts and resources on that, but I'm just interested in kind of a introduction to how you would even get started exploring that.
Yeah, and you're right. That's a great question, because it is intimidating for a lot of people, and there are just a lot of factors involved. I mean, my book, I did write this as a resource for people who are curious and who are really looking to get started. And so I do give some, very basic microdosing guidelines, and it's about starting so low and going so slowly. And again, it does take patience, it takes a little titration, but even with other, compounds or, substances or medications we might be taking, like you pointed out, it's a similar journey. It's not, there's no medication that works for everyone in the exact same way. So cannabis doesn't do that either. But if we start with, it depends on what we're looking for, of course. That if we're looking for more anxiety relief, I would recommend more of a CBD, high CBD, either a tincture or a flower or some kind of edible with maybe just a teeny bit of THC in order to help it work better. That's the entourage effect. The entourage effect tells us that cannabis works best as a whole, not as isolates, right? So that's a whole other conversation. but if we're using it to relieve pain, that would be more for me of a topical, for instance. There's so many amazing topicals on the market, from creams to patches to lubes that help with pain during sex, for instance. And it's a whole other combo because, there's plenty of ways that can enhance there. So, again, it does depend a little bit on what we're looking for, but, absolutely starting low, going slow, and really finding your ideal mode of consumption, because I think a lot of people are turned off by thinking, oh, I have to smoke weed.
Yes. Yeah.
That is not the case anymore.
Yeah. So you actually just touched on some of these different ways. And I'd love if we could repeat that, because that was me. Like, do I have to get a bong and light up and fill my whole living room with marijuana smoke? I didn't know about some of the other modalities. And so you touched on some of those. Do you mind repeating some of the different ways that you could be a consumer?
Sure. So, of course, you have just regular old smoking flower, which we used to call bud, or just, just plain old weed. You have vaporizing flower, which is where there's no combustion. You don't.
I'll show. So this is we have a vape right here.
Nice. Yeah. So is that a vape with liquid, or is that with flower?
This is a liquid vape.
Okay. Yeah. So there's vaping liquids. It's also vaporizing flower itself. So that's a whole other thing that doesn't involve letting it on fire, but it turns like the actual flower into vapor. So those are the inhalation. There are 3. And then, of course, you have edibles, you have drinks and infused, all sorts of things. Gummies are the big ones these days.
Which beware, because if you give your kids gummy vitamins, you also have to make sure you keep those gummies far away.
Lock it up. That's the way.
Yeah,
for sure. So you've got all kinds of different edible possibilities. You've got drinking, you've got capsules, you've got eating various treats and infused products. There are sublingual strips you can put under your tongue, which actually take effect a little bit faster than other edibles, because they don't have to go all the way through your liver first. Sprays, tinctures, another thing you put under your tongue. And then, of course, we've got our topicals and our lubes. So those are the main ways. Inhaling, ingesting, or rubbing it on your body.
Yes. Yeah. Awesome. And that we discovered some creams. I think Foria is a leading brand that does some of the more sex related. So that I think is huge for talking about vaginal and sex pain. Or tension, or, for women that hold stress in their pelvic floor. And I like that you also mentioned patches. And something that I recently discovered is that there are also suppositories. So maybe if someone's using it for an illness, or, whatever their usage is, that they need these benefits in a different way, there are so many different options.
So many different, yes, exactly. Yes, suppositories is another mode. And that's like kind of topical, internal together. But yes. So you've got CBD that can help with pain during sex. There are a lot of women who have, endometriosis, pelvic pain, trauma from childbirth, who do find CBD really helpful for sex. And then THC can be helpful more of as a sensation enhancer. And it helps many women, relax, get out of their heads a little bit, get more into the mood. That's more when taken internally as opposed to, externally.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know we talked about this earlier. We could go on and on about specifically cannabis and sex, which we'll do at another time. There's so much to dig into there. But you used this term earlier, microdosing. So could you talk just a little bit about microdosing versus getting high, kind of the traditional language that we hear?
Yeah. So absolutely. Microdosing is about, just taking in the minimum amount to be able to shift a little bit. It's not about getting high, getting out of it, getting altered so we can't, respond to our kids and respond to emergencies, for instance. That's very important as a parent. You need to be able to do that. So microdosing does vary per person based on tolerance, experience, someone's ECS, that's the, endocannabinoid system that we all vary. But I do give really general guidelines that somewhere between 1 milligram of THC and 5 milligrams of THC is a, starter microdose for a lot of people. If you're totally new, I would start at 1.
Yeah. And you kind of feel what makes the most sense for you.
Exactly. And then if it's inhaled, I would say like, 1 like moderate inhalation could be a microdose, or even half of, of an inhalation. It's really, starting so slow. There's some people who get effects from, a very, very small amount, and some people who you need to titrate up just a little bit.
Yeah.
But, I would say, I mean, for me, even though I have experience with cannabis and I have tolerance, even 5 milligrams is a good microdose for me.
Yeah, I love that. And again, so many different areas we could go into that, but I want to really specifically talk about this in moms, and you brought this up earlier. So I know for your book, you talk to cannabis experts and scientists and, people that have that background, but you also mentioned that you talk to a lot of what we call canna moms. And I'm curious what they shared with you about being their reason for entering this space and consuming.
Yeah. So, okay. So many reasons. I did a few surveys in addition to just talking to people one-on-one. And I found, okay, mood, sleep, pain, and sex. Those were the biggest ones. And then I guess I would add as a social alternative to alcohol, or like, whatever social looks like these days during the pandemic.
Yeah.
So, and I guess that's kind of related to mood as well. But yeah, basically moms are using it to, shift mood from like work brain to mom brain, or, momming to sexy brain later after the kids are asleep. These like transition points, I think, are really helpful for a lot of moms. So there's that. Of course, they're just relieving these everyday aches and pains that we all get from, falling asleep with a baby attached to us and, in this position or whatever. And sleep. I mean, I don't know about you, but sleep was really tough for me in the earliest years. And your kids are a little smaller than mine, and so you might still be in that, stage. And, in the earliest days when I had to be waking up a lot with them, I didn't really address my sleep that well. But once they started sleeping some, thankfully, then I had to address like my sleep issues that came up, from that like 4 or 5 year period of sleeplessness. So CBD helps a lot there too.
Yeah. No, that's great. That's great. And you mentioned, mood, sleep, sex, social.
Mood, sleep, sex, pain, social.
Pain. Yes. Yeah. Okay. That's great. And I just add into there, I think something that we find in our home is that like almost just that patience, like that gap between emotion and emotional response, specifically with our kids. We find that microdosing gives us a little gap to see outside of the reactionary and be more kind of present and grounded and rooted in that experience, which has been, a huge benefit for us.
Yeah, absolutely. And so many moms said that they can, they just feel more creative, more playful, more fun as a parent. And, like it's so easy for moms to like get down on ourselves because, we're not everything all the time. We're trying to manage everything and take care of everything and make sure everybody has what they need. But then we're also supposed to be this fun, playful mom that gets down on the floor and does, blocks and Legos and drawing and all that stuff. And that's great. But yes, cannabis is a huge help for so many parents, including me. I just feel more generous with myself.
Yeah. So we know there's kind of this like mommy wine culture, and now there's this kind of emerging on the outskirts canna mom culture. From your research, from your experience and conversations, how would you compare the alcohol and cannabis use and how they play into parenting?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really interesting. Maybe first of all, like you said, alcohol use is normalized and cannabis use is not. So that's an important point of comparison. But it's, we're growing, we're getting there. We're, slowly bringing these conversations more into the light. And in terms of the effects, I would say, of alcohol versus cannabis in a parenting situation, a lot of moms told me that they felt more like insensitive or tuned out with alcohol and their kids. And they feel more in with cannabis.
Yeah, I think that's a really good distinction. Yeah, it's like the alcohol is almost an escape in a lot of ways, and cannabis is an engagement.
It is. And of course it's dose dependent because, you know, you can zone out too if you
Yeah.
overuse it.
Yes, yes, you can.
But, you know, but like with cannabis, I'm very intentional about my dose. And I don't know about you, but, you know, when I used to drink, you know, socially, and I really don't anymore because it gives me migraines now, but when I used to drink socially, I wouldn't necessarily be that mindful or intentional about it. I would never drink like a whole bottle of wine or anything, but I might say, I'm going to have a glass of wine, but then end up having two. Of having 2.5 or 3, you know, so that it was harder for me to be intentional about alcohol use because you lose some inhibitions and, you know, like that sugar craving comes in. So anyway, there's that. And then of course the physiological differences of like, you know, having a hangover versus not having a hangover, you know, headaches are exacerbated by alcohol and not by cannabis, or helped by cannabis. So like all these ways, I just feel like, you know, the alcohol cannabis comparison only goes so far, but it's something we can all kind of like wrap our heads around.
Yeah, I think that's great. So I want to keep us close to this kind of 30-minute mark and wrap up our conversation. But my last question that I had from a follower was, how do you suggest someone start this conversation with a partner who might have stigmas?
Yes. So that's important because, you know, we care about what our partners think about, you know, our choices. Obviously, I do talk about that in chapter 10, the chapter about sex and relationships. I break down a little bit of, you know, how you might approach that. And I think that one way is just starting that conversation through CBD because it doesn't get you high and it's helpful for a lot of people. And so just like opening up that cannabis discussion just a little bit. Oh, hey, I rubbed this on my, you know, sore shoulder and it feels better. Or, you know, I took a tincture and I slept better last night. You know, things like that. And just emphasizing the fact that CBD doesn't get you high, so there's nothing to worry about, and it's legal. It's legal in all 50 states as long as it's, you know, under a certain percentage of THC. So, you know, I think starting there and then, you know, offering up ideas or ways that, you know, if you wanted to branch into THC, how THC might be able to help you, like emphasizing those wellness uses, like, you know, better, you know, more patience, better mood, better sex that might appeal to your partner. Right. You know, so there are various ways into this conversation, but I think just emphasizing that, you know, start slow and low. Don't, you know, you don't have to introduce the whole conversation all at once, but gradually people are becoming more accustomed to hearing about some form of cannabis.
Yeah. And I think it's really important that we continue to have images and conversations and things out there that portray cannabis as a medicinal tool, as a, you know, as a positive part of our story, as opposed to a lot of the images we were raised around and the messaging that has so long been around cannabis. So I also, adding to that, for the person who asked this, I would say to start also with Weed Mom, to start with the conversation, with the book, and be able to have some of those talking points to bring to your partner as you're understanding and unfolding in that as well.
That's right. And there's more and more science too to back it up. You know, there's still a lot of research necessary for us to really get a full picture of, you know, of the medical benefits of cannabis, but we know some things, and, you know, those are pretty solid in terms of what, you know, what cannabis can help with.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm have the chat box open if anyone has a question before we hop off. But Danielle, is there anything else that really sticks out to you as we wrap this up and we talk specifically to moms about their curiosity and potential journey with cannabis?
Let's see, what is important to know? I mean, really, I think that we're on the path to normalizing cannabis, responsible cannabis use. It's just, we're in this transition moment and it's like a little uncomfortable still. But, you know, but I can, like, I imagine us in 10, you know, 15, 20 years, having so much more open conversation and, you know, having like much more of the mainstream being on board with it. So I guess I would say if you're curious and you're, you know, starting your path, like just take heart because it's all changing and it's, you know, it's getting better and better. Our access, our education, and our attitudes are all just improving.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so true. And I'm not sure if you see the chat, but we see someone sharing that they don't like smoking in front of their kids, but they also don't like feeling like it's something to hide. Do you have any experience or feedback on that?
Yeah. So, it's evolved a little bit for me as I have evolved in my own cannabis journey, and my kids are now 8 and 11, and we talk about cannabis way more than they would like. Probably. They know a lot. But, they really know how to keep themselves safe. They know what it is. They know it's not for kids, all that stuff. And, so what I usually say to my kids is, if I'm going to smoke, for instance, I say, oh, I have a headache, or I'm not in a great mood, and I would really like to be able to have more fun with you, or, sit down and do this, coloring book together. Give me 5 or 10 minutes, and I'm going to smoke some cannabis. I do tell them. And when I come back, let's engage with what we're doing. So I don't do it in front of them, but I do kind of let them know, and they understand that the effects of cannabis for me are just being more present, engaged, better parent. And so they're supportive.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. And our kids are younger. They're 2 and 4. So we really just call it medicine right now. It's a kind of medicine that is for grownups. And we do sometimes also say, like, either have a headache or, I'm feeling really overwhelmed right now, so I'm going to use this medicine. But again, our most common modality is vapes. So, it looks like this. It's maybe different for them, but they don't know any reason to stigmatize it or to have strong feelings. So we just say, I'm going to step outside and use my medicine and be right back, or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. And, as my kids get older and they become teens, like I might, rethink how I have this conversation and, all that, because it's a different, different age set. But generally speaking, I agree with what the commenter said, that it's really great to be open and honest, but I personally am not very comfortable, like, consuming directly in front of my kids yet.
Yeah. Yeah. So interesting. So interesting. I don't know if you grew up with like cigarette smoking being predominant, but that is something I remember as a kid, and I don't, necessarily have negative feelings towards it, but it was such an interesting, it was never talked about, so yeah, we're always thinking about how we make things less scary by giving appropriate, age appropriate conversation for it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And yeah, there's a lot to say to kids about, if you're a regular cannabis user, I think it's important to talk to kids and, different ages and stages, different conversations. And I do cover that too in the book, and we can talk about that at some point, next time if you would like to.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Danielle, for so much good information in one place, for being willing to step in and lead this conversation, because I know that when you engage some of those hard, stigmatized, taboo topics, it's not always easy. You get some interesting feedback too. So just thank you for using your energy to lead the way for us. And I'm hoping that, more and more people get their hands on Weed Mom and continue this conversation and figure out, what that does or doesn't mean for them.
Thank you. And really, thank you for being willing to talk about this. I mean, it's something that I think, we're going to see more and more, but we're still on the front lines of it.
Yeah. Yes. Well, it's a pleasure. And it's so good. It's an easy read. It can be picked up and put back down in 3 minutes, and you have something to think through. I really appreciate the way that it's laid out in the graphics. I've got lots of like flap down markers in my book for the things to reference. It's great.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. This is really fun.
Yes. Thank you. Have a great weekend.
All right. Same to you. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for joining, people.